He ridiculed a 17-year-old girl in front of the whole garage, then stood in astonished silence as she expertly repaired the engine that no one else could handle. "Tell your daughter to stay out of the way. This ain't a classroom." That was the very first thing Wesley Trask ever said to Donovan Morton. No greeting, no handshake, just loud enough for the whole garage crew to catch. Donovan remained unfazed. He had dealt with enough arrogant owners to understand the importance of staying composed. His daughter, 17-year-old Julia, was attuned to it all. She absorbed every syllable. Yet she remained unresponsive. She kept her gaze fixed on the rusted-out Aston Martin V12 parked near Bay 3. Her plan was to spend time with her dad, perhaps even get some hands-on experience with a rare engine. Becoming a target was the last thing on her mind. The garage was expansive, featuring glass fronts and polished concrete, nestled in a side street in Tempe, Arizona, where the desert heat rendered even the shadows warm. Donovan had spent more than 5 years at Trask Automotive Restorations. He was known for his ability to rebuild a carburetor effortlessly, yet the new boss appeared indifferent to that reputation. Wesley Trask had taken over the place from his father just 2 months prior, and made it evident from the very beginning that he desired a fresh atmosphere. By fresh atmosphere, it seemed he was referring to a reduction in seasoned workers and a strict exclusion of women in the garage. That Saturday morning began at a leisurely pace. Donovan was securing a timing belt when Julia approached, cleaning her hands with a shop rag. She had been observing a cluster of mechanics bickering over a V12 that had remained silent for weeks. "I think that sensor's wired backwards," she murmured, almost to herself. The laughter came swiftly and forcefully. One of the fellows, with a lean frame and a cap worn backward, flashed a grin. "Looks like we've got ourselves a technician, huh?" Another chimed in, suggesting she might want to instruct us on how to repair the Ferrari as well. Donovan glanced over, his mouth parting, but before he could utter a word, Trask interjected, his insincere smile emanating a peculiar vibe. "Actually," he said, "let's give her a chance." The entire shop fell silent. "Are you serious?" one of the guys said. Trask nodded. "Let's see what the prodigy's got. You think that sensor's off? Great, go ahead and fix it. If you're right, I'll personally clean the shop floor with a toothbrush." He was clearly jesting, or perhaps not. Regardless, he believed he had captivated the audience. Julia glanced at her father. Donovan observed her, uncertain. He was aware of his daughter's talents. She had followed him closely since she could first grasp a socket wrench. Yet this place was not their familiar garage. It was something else entirely. "You don't have to," he muttered. "I know," she replied. Then she walked over to the Ferrari. Everyone took a step back. She swept her long braids behind her shoulder, snatched a pair of gloves from the rack, and lifted the hood. It hissed softly as it opened, exposing the tangled, half-rebuilt chaos beneath. The tubing, wiring, and engine mounts sprawled out like a perplexing maze, seemingly crafted to bewilder anyone who dared to navigate it. Maybe she should check out a YouTube tutorial first, a voice suggested quietly, eliciting a chuckle from another mechanic nearby. Trask folded his arms and leaned casually against a post. "Take your time," he remarked. "We've only been at that for 3 weeks." Julia remained silent. She leaned in, her gaze sweeping over everything with a quiet intensity that unsettled those around her. It wasn't merely confidence, it was a profound and unwavering focus. She began to carefully shift the wires, examining the mounts, applying gentle pressure to specific connections to check for any looseness. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Trask inquired, his voice raised for all to hear. She responded, her voice barely above a whisper. "This thing's been touched by too many hands. It appears that your ignition feed has been redirected incorrectly. The sensor is indicating a reading of 12 volts, yet it's struggling to reach 8. This has certainly caught the interest of everyone involved." One of the older men arched an eyebrow. "She's guessing, perhaps," another remarked, yet she remained unfazed. Donovan moved in a bit closer, but kept his silence. Julia carefully detached the main harness from its socket, retrieved her phone flashlight, and crouched down to follow the line. "There's a sense of determination about her," someone whispered. Trask's expression shifted ever so slightly. "All right, brilliant one. If you believe you have the solution, you have 20 minutes. Julia rose to her feet. "I won't require that much time." But Trask had no inkling of the tempest he had just welcomed into his shop. The atmosphere changed palpably, even in silence. As soon as Julia declared she wouldn't require 20 minutes, stillness enveloped the garage. There was no respect, not yet, only a palpable tension. A few eyebrows arched, arms crossed defensively. They were observing now, no longer merely mocking. Julia focused intently on the engine. The Ferrari's V12 was not merely intricate, it was precise. European imports of this caliber demanded nothing less than perfection. One error in rewiring, one misinterpreted sensor, and you could find yourself lost in a maze of your own making. She called out with a steady voice, "Can someone hand me a T15? No one stirred. Then a solitary tool clinked against the metal table nearby. Reese was short and wiry, perpetually chewing gum, and often the loudest presence in the room. He had cracked jokes earlier, but now his gaze was fixed on her in a new way. "I want to see where this goes," he muttered, just loud enough for those around to catch his words. Julia grabbed the screwdriver, her focus unwavering. It wasn't a matter of rudeness. Her mind was already deep in the wiring harness. She moved with a swift precision, each action deliberate and measured, no hesitation, no uncertainty. Trask rested against a hydraulic lift, arms crossed with an air of authority. One wrong move and that car enters lockout mode. You cut it short, it's 20 grand worth of fried sensors. Julia didn't even look his way. "Perhaps that's why you ought to have studied the diagram." That line struck with the force of a heavy tool hitting the ground. A startled snort escaped from someone, swiftly silenced. Donovan remained still, offering no smile or frown. His hands were tightly clenched before him, as if the act of holding them together could prevent him from intervening. She disconnected the faulty connector, blowing away a fine layer of dust, and started to examine the pins. The engine bay was cramped, a space where even the most seasoned hands found it challenging to maneuver. Yet Julia was not faltering. She flowed with a certain cadence, as if she anticipated the next 3 moves. From her backpack, she retrieved her small multimeter, one that belonged to her, not a borrowed tool, and attached it to the leads with precision. Reese tilted his head, curiosity piqued. Where had she even picked up this knowledge? Donovan finally broke the silence. "Garage at home, she's been tinkering with engines since childhood, and none of you thought to mention that she was practically a living repair guide," someone remarked. Donovan simply shrugged. "I didn't see it as significant." The tension was easing, albeit slightly. What took its place was not solace. It was a sense of wonder. Even those who had previously scoffed were now drawn in, leaning forward, glancing over shoulders, observing her hands as if they were instruments of resonance. Trask approached her with deliberate slowness. "Let's clarify," he stated, tone cutting. "If you mess this up, you bear the entire burden." Julia didn't even glance in his direction. "Of course, if I resolve it, will you accept complete accountability for the 3 weeks lost?" That one stung as well. Reese genuinely chuckled this time. Trask's expression grew tense. "We'll see." "Have you ever considered that the problem might not have been the machine?" Julia inquired, her tone straightforward and sincere. "Perhaps the problem lay in your perspective." She carefully twisted the connector into position and fastened it with a new clip. Then, without any ceremony, she rose and dusted off her hands. Grease marked her wrist, a faint line on her cheek. She was indifferent. Now it reads 9.8 volts. Still, low yet stable. Reese blinked in disbelief. "How is that possible?" "You managed to reverse the flow from the secondary relay," she stated matter-of-factly. It was depriving itself. The phrases held little significance for those unfamiliar with technology in the room, yet for those well-versed in wiring, it was entirely clear, someone murmured. "I never even considered checking that." A mechanic in his 40s rested against a bench, his gaze intense. "I rewired that relay." "Indeed," Julia remarked, her tone gentle, "and you shouldn't blame yourself. This layout is reversed compared to the usual designs. Subtle and understated. For the first time, the atmosphere was devoid of irony. Only silence lingered. Julia called out, I need one more thing. Someone turn the key to ignition, but don't try to start it. Donovan moved first, sliding into the driver's seat. Allow me. Moments later, the dashboard illuminated, pristine, transparent, devoid of error codes. Whoa, Reese whispered. Everyone leaned closer. Just wait, Julia urged. Yet none of them anticipated what was about to unfold. The quiet in the garage had become dense. It was neither tense nor mocking, merely tranquil. All eyes were fixed on Julia, breaths suspended as she slipped back under the hood. All right, she declared. Now that the relays are aligned, I need to reprogram the idle mapping. Your ECU is operating on factory settings. It doesn't align with the airflow modification that someone implemented. Who informed her about the airflow modifications? One individual murmured. She realized it, but when someone else inquired, Julia remained silent. She was focused on connecting a cord to the diagnostic port and launching a small app on her phone. It wasn't an extravagant gadget adorned with logos. It was merely lines of numbers, unrefined code and adjustment settings that she began to scroll through, as if deciphering sheet music. You can reprogram that from your phone? Reese inquired. Remotely, yeah, she responded, her gaze still intent. It's not perfect, but it gets the job done quicker. Wesley Trask scoffed, pacing behind her. We've had skilled technicians with complete laptop setups attempt that very thing. They didn't accomplish anything. Julia stated plainly that they misread the correction table. They imposed a throttle offset without adjusting the airflow ratio, accordingly. Trask blinked, caught in a moment of silence. He remained unresponsive, unsure of how to articulate his thoughts. All right, she said. I'm going to reset the idle slope to 7.2. Then I'm cutting the cold start injection. Delay by 2 seconds. She pressed a button. With a click, the dashboard lights flickered once more. Donovan lifted his gaze from the steering wheel. No warning lights, he remarked. Now try to crank it, she called. He turned the key. The engine whirred, whined, and then fell silent. Once more he tried, and the outcome remained unchanged. The sound had grown more intense, nearly reactive, yet still not igniting. A voice from the rear remarked that they were close, while Julia furrowed her brow, not in frustration. Just pondering the secondary coil, she murmured. It's out of alignment. Are you certain? Donovan inquired. No, she confessed. But I won't leave. It like this. She turned back to the bay and picked up a small socket set. The mechanic stepped aside, silent and observant, allowing her the space she needed. She opened the ignition housing, adjusted the coil seating, and tightened it gently, her fingers quick and steady. Each movement was a testament to her practiced skill, guided by muscle memory. She moved forward without a moment's pause, unwavering and focused. There was no flair, only clarity in her actions. What is she up to now? Trask wondered, more to himself than to anyone around. Addressing the oversight, Reese replied. She gave her dad a nod. Give it another shot, he said as he turned the key once more. This time the Ferrari didn't merely cough, it chugged. A deep, raw churn built into a pulse. The entire garage vibrated as the V12 finally roared to life. Idling low and fierce like a beast awakening from a long slumber, all movement halted. Trask gazed as if confronted by a spectre. Reese advanced cautiously, his eyes filled with astonishment. For 24 days, silence reigned. Jalia's expression remained unchanged as she shifted her gaze to Trask. You wished for it to move. It's operational, but he hasn't responded. Another technician crouched to examine the display. The throttle response is precise and the temperatures are steady. Check the AFR, Jalaya instructed. He complied, noting 12.7. She was spot on. The shop buzzed with a new energy, transformed in its own unique way. The mechanics exchanged hushed words, their heads shaking, some even sporting grins. Not directed at her, but rather at the realization that something had finally clicked into place. Trask, however, wore a frown. He appeared bewildered, as if confronted with a revelation in a dialect he had never taken the time to understand. Donovan exited the vehicle and paused for a moment, gazing at the engine. Eventually he shifted his gaze to her. I never showed you that coil trick. Yes, you did, she replied. You just weren't aware that I was observing. He let out a soft laugh, shaking his head in amusement. You're always observing. From the rear, a solitary clap echoed, slow and deliberate. Then another joined in. It wasn't loud, not a cinematic moment, just real individuals, truly taken aback. Trask finally spoke up. That doesn't imply you're an authority on the matter. I never claimed to be, Jalaya responded. You're the one who turned it into a challenge. Yet there remained unspoken truths, revelations that would leave them utterly astonished. For what felt like an eternity, silence enveloped the group. The engine hummed softly behind Jalaya, as if it had been anticipating her all along, but she chose to ignore it. Her gaze was fixed on Trask. The garage owner cleared his throat, attempting to recalibrate the power dynamic. Just because one engine was fixed doesn't imply expertise, and the silence was palpable. Not this time. Donovan intervened, his voice low yet cutting. You dared to challenge her, Wes, she responded. Well, Trask grumbled, fiddling with the cuffs of his shirt. Perhaps she just had a stroke of luck. Fortune doesn't alter circuits or modify control. Units, Reese remarked. You witnessed it, we all did. Trask's jaw tightened. He was losing grip on the situation, and he was aware of it. He surveyed the room, eyes darting as if seeking an ally. Yet the expressions returned to him were far from supportive. Jalaya chose not to engage in her own defense. She had no interest in accolades. Disconnecting her phone from the diagnostic port, she wiped her hands once more. I wasn't trying to prove anything, she stated. You caught me off guard. I simply wanted to protect my dad's reputation. That hit harder than she meant. Hit too. Donovan glanced at her, his expression revealing no surprise. There was a subtle pride in the air, the kind that fathers often carry without uttering a word. Reese crossed his arms and regarded Trask. She was the first individual in this garage who approached that engine without second-guessing herself. She quickly identified the issue and resolved it. An older mechanic, his boots stained with oil and a constant squint etched on his face, remarked, I've been at this for 30 years, and she spotted what I overlooked in just 15 minutes. Trask attempted to dismiss it. All right, she has a keen observation, but that doesn't imply she's skilled. I never claimed she was, Jalaya responded. Yet neither were many of the individuals you brought on board. That one slice was precise, and the quiet came back, tense then reflective. Donovan gave a single nod. She has been assisting me with engine rebuilds in the backyard for years. Initially, I believed it was merely a pastime. Then she began mending. Things I hadn't even realized were broken, Reese inquired. Hold on. How long has she been at this? Jalaya glanced up. Since I was 12, someone let out a gentle whistle. Trask shifted his attention back to her, this time more softly. So, you're telling me you learned on your own? I observed my dad, inquired. About things, disassembled items and reassembled them. I made plenty of mistakes, but I gained more knowledge from those experiences than anything else. Another mechanic laughed softly. That's how many of us came to understand. She's one of our own, whether you accept it or not. Trask remained silent. He didn't need to say a word. His expression conveyed everything. This was far from the way he had envisioned the day unfolding. The engine hummed steadily, its sound both robust and fluid, full of life. Jalaya shifted her gaze from Trask back to the bay, taking in the engine for one final look. Don't forget to change the oil before you push it too hard. After sitting for so long, the viscosity is likely compromised. Reese chuckled. She has a point. Then another person posed the question that had been simmering since the moment the engine roared to life. Have you ever considered pursuing this seriously? Jalaya blinked, puzzled. What do you mean? Like turning it into your career full-time? There are stores that would pay for skills like yours. Donovan looked at her, intrigued by her response. Jalaya merely shrugged. Perhaps. I enjoy creating things. There's a certain satisfaction when elements that once seemed incompatible finally come together. How you've got a talent, Reese remarked. Trask grumbled something quietly, but no one bothered to ask him to clarify. At that moment, another mechanic, a younger fellow named Victor, gestured toward the corner. You left the laptop behind. You managed to sort that out with just your phone. What other surprises are hiding in that backpack? Jalaya offered a small smile. A tablet, 2 diagnostic apps, an old coil I've been rewiring, and some sandwiches. This time the room genuinely laughed, real laughter, devoid of sarcasm or disbelief. Yet, just as they were beginning to relax, Jalaya was on the verge of revealing something that would entirely change their perception of her. Reese leaned casually against the workbench, still laughing. "Sandwiches as well? You really came prepared." Jalaya offered a subtle smirk, yet her words were few. Her gaze remained fixed on the engine, her thoughts evidently sifting through each variable, every possible imperfection. It seemed as if her eyes were oblivious to the machine before her. They observed a dialogue, a cadence. At this moment, it resonated with her perfectly. Victor moved in closer, gazing into the engine bay as if it had suddenly sprouted wings. "I've never witnessed this thing running so smoothly." The previous guy mentioned the timing chain might have slipped. "Not true," Jalaya said. "The timing was adequate. It simply lacked the awareness to pause." Reese glanced at Donovan. "You must feel quite proud." Donovan glanced at his daughter, a slow nod of acknowledgement. "I've always felt pride, but this belongs to her." The atmosphere was gradually becoming more inviting, akin to metal slowly melting. Yet Trask had more to say. He advanced, clearing his throat, a tight smirk playing at the edge of his lips. He was attempting to assert his authority. "Fine, it was commendable," he acknowledged. "Yet I've witnessed glimpses of skill previously. That doesn't imply she's prepared for the actual challenge." Jalaya turned to face him. "You think this wasn't real?" He shrugged. "One job doesn't mean much in the long run." Reese interrupted. "Seriously, we've been pulling our hair out for weeks." She strolls in, glances around, and suddenly everything works. That's not just luck. It's a display of talent. "Whatever," Trask scoffed. "Let's not pretend she's a genius." Jalaya circled the vehicle and retrieved a crumpled envelope from her backpack, its surface already stained with grease. She passed it to Reese, who arched an eyebrow, carefully opened it, and emitted a soft whistle. "No way." "What?" another mechanic inquired, flipping the letter over. The letter bore the prestigious emblem of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, with a distinct line dividing the page. It announced the awarding of a full academic scholarship, granted in recognition of a mechanical engineering evaluation and the submission of an independent project. Victor's jaw dropped in astonishment. "You were accepted into MIT?" Jalaya nodded. "They extended the scholarship offer last month. I submitted a design for a modular combustion engine that reduces waste output by 30%. Constructed the prototype from discarded materials. For a change, the garage was enveloped in silence. Even the engine's idle was more subdued than ever. Trask examined the letter, his gaze moving swiftly across the words. Yet, silence enveloped him. "You submitted it at 17, Reese inquired. Jalaya nodded. She utilized the components that her father's clients had discarded. An older gentleman rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "So you crafted your own engine in your own time, right in your backyard?" "Indeed." Reese lifted the letter as if it were evidence of an untold tale. "Why didn't you start with this?" Jalaya offered. A slight shrug. "I never expected it." The entire garage felt transformed. The doubt had shattered. Some appeared flustered, others seemed astonished. Trask resembled a person who had wagered on the losing side and was fully aware of it. Donovan moved forward once more. "She isn't seeking validation, she's simply pursuing her passion." Reese approached Trask. He shook his head. "She's more qualified than many of us and we didn't even notice it." Trask attempted to dismiss it. "That doesn't imply she's prepared for the strain. She experienced the strain." Reese lost her composure. "You transformed this into a challenge. She converted it into a teaching moment." The engine continued to hum, consistent and comforting, a striking juxtaposition to the tension that Trask could no longer conceal. Victor smiled. "If MIT is already reaching out to her, I'm eager to see where she will be in 5 years. She's already surpassing many college graduates," Reese remarked. Donovan then shifted his attention to his daughter. "Do you want to share what you've been up to on the weekends?" Jalaya paused for a moment, then gave a slight shrug. "Repairing lawnmowers, reconstructing go-karts, and doing some freelance coding." "Freelance coding?" Victor blinked. "I created my own scan tool," she said. "I developed the software entirely from the ground up." The atmosphere buzzed with hushed whispers and soft whistles once more. It was undeniable now. This girl was more than just an extraordinary discovery. She was an unexpected force, catching most of them off guard. Yet, it wasn't just respect that was shifting. Some of these men began to introspect in ways they hadn't done in years. Wesley Trask stood with his arms still crossed, but the confidence he had earlier had faded. He observed Jalaya as one might watch an approaching storm, initially believing it would bypass them, only to find it looming directly above. She didn't glance his way again. There was no need for words. Her work had already conveyed more than she ever could. One mechanic, Rick, a reserved man in his mid-40s, the type who had witnessed countless apprentices come and go, finally shattered the stillness. You will succeed out there. It's not only because of your intelligence, but also due to your composure in the face of our doubts. Jalaya took her time to respond. She gazed at her hands, grease lingering on her knuckles. I've grown accustomed to it. Rick frowned. To what? The lack of expectations from others, she replied, gazing at me as if I should remain insignificant, silent, not daring to occupy too much room. Reese approached, cleaning his hands with a shop towel. They treat everyone that way eventually. Perhaps, she remarked, but not in this manner. That made him pause, not due to confusion, but because he understood all too well. Trask let out a soft scoff. You're turning this into something it isn't. Jalaya finally met his gaze. No, you did that when you turned my dad into a punchline just for bringing me here. Donovan shifted beside her, not defensive, just there. She didn't need saving, but he was always going to be right behind her. Reese murmured. She's got a valid point, Victor interjected. Wes, she didn't request this. You turned it into a spectacle. Now you're frustrated that the conclusion doesn't belong to you. The tension intensified further. Trask stared at the ground, his jaw clenched. Yet, he understood that engaging in a debate would only exacerbate the situation. Rick rested against a tool cart. You know, when I first began my journey here, a foreman once told me that you don't gain any wisdom from those who believe they have all the answers. One gains insight from those who continue to seek answers. She posed the pertinent inquiries. Jalaya offered a subtle nod of gratitude. Reese chuckled. I recall the days when I felt pretty impressive, just for syncing an automatic transmission with a flashlight and a prayer. She's out here programming ECUs and building engines as if it's a summer camp activity. Another person contributed, and she never boasted about it. That's uncommon. Jalaya wasn't seeking admiration, yet in its presence, it no longer seemed artificial. It felt deserved. Donovan glanced at her once more, his face radiating pride. You've remained silent for so long, yet when something shatters, your voice rises. Jalaya offered a faint smile. Reese gazed at her, deep in thought. We often discuss the importance of respect in this space, yet we don't consistently extend it to those who truly deserve it. That shifts now. Even Trask refrained from resisting. He remained silent, gaze downcast. Let's be honest, Reese went on. If she decided to come in here tomorrow and collaborate with us, she absolutely could. She would outshine more than half the men we've encountered. She's not returning. Donovan mentioned, she's destined for greater things. That lingered in the atmosphere for a brief moment. The engine purred once more, flawlessly calibrated. Victor chuckled quietly. I can't get over how she managed to fix it using just a phone and a backpack. Jalaya surveyed the room. You all truly excel at your craft. However, one tends to become accustomed to a particular approach. Occasionally the issue isn't with the mechanism itself, but rather with the perspective that has been instilled in you. That hit hard. Silence filled the room. There were no laughs, no playful banter. There was a moment of silent comprehension. Reese snapped his hands together, interrupting the stillness. Okay, let's wrap this up before it consumes the fuel. Donovan leaned in and switched off the ignition. The engine emitted a soft click, settling into silence. Jalaya took a step back, removing her gloves with deliberate care. I appreciate the chance to experience this, she remarked, addressing the air around her. Victor smiled in response. Thank you for revealing what we overlooked. Before any questions could arise about her next move, she made her intentions unmistakably clear. There would be no slowing down. Reese leaned against the wall, arms crossed, nervously chewing the inside of his cheek. So what's next for you, he asked. Jalaya paused, considering her response. The shop lights hummed gently overhead, and the air was heavy with the aroma of oil and metal. She surveyed her surroundings, not only taking in the vehicle she had resurrected, but also the men who had observed her transformation. Some remained in disbelief. A handful felt a twinge of humiliation. They had all changed since her arrival. I graduate in a few months, she remarked. After that, I'll be off to Cambridge for the summer program before the fall semester begins. MIT's fortunate to have you, Victor remarked. She offered a faint, weary smile. I once believed I needed to demonstrate my worth in environments like that. And now, Rick inquired. Jalaya met his gaze. Now I understand I do, regardless of what anyone else believes. Reese let out a whistle. That moment, right there, is exactly why she's destined for success. Donovan stood next to her, his arms finally at ease after a tense. Morning. Tried to convey this to everyone, he remarked with a casual shrug. This young woman has been ahead of the game since she was 15, tinkering with transmissions just for the thrill of it. Trask cleared his throat. All eyes were on him. She's got talent, he remarked, his tone subdued. There was no question. It wasn't quite a compliment. It wasn't a rejection. Not quite. Jalaya gave a single nod. Trask acknowledged this, glancing at Donovan before turning his gaze back to her. If you're ever interested in taking up a job in a shop after school or something, just give me a shout. There's an opening. That surprised a few of the guys. Donovan remained silent, turning his gaze to his daughter instead. Jalaya took a moment to reflect. I appreciate the offer, but I have other commitments. It was a statement of fact, not pride. She was under no obligation to make concessions. Rick acknowledged this with a nod. There was a sense of respect, and Victor chuckled quietly. It's understandable. Places like this can be challenging to thrive in. Jalaya glanced at her dad. Are we leaving? He nodded, taking a towel and drying his hands. Let's tackle the heat before it reaches those scorching triple digits. As they approached the bay doors, Reese hurried after them. Hey, before you leave, they paused. Reese raised his hand as if he were on the verge of imparting some profound insight, only to let it drop once more. Just remember us when you're off constructing rocket ships or something of that nature. Jalaya smiled. When you repair a Ferrari, the garage is always in your mind. Victor's voice came from behind. You're a mechanic, Jalaya, regardless of the degree they hand you. She hesitated at the threshold. Perhaps, but I believe there's more to me than that. What do you mean? Reese inquired. A creator, she remarked. Of machines, of concepts, perhaps even of improved methods to care for others. That lingered weightily in the atmosphere. Not preachy, just sincere. Donovan opened the passenger door for her, an ingrained gesture. She settled in, her backpack draped over her chest, the letter from MIT peeking out from the zipper. As Donovan ignited the truck, the distant growl of the V-12 lingered in the air. Silence enveloped them for a few moments before he broke it with a question. Do you believe they'll handle the next girl differently? Jalaya reclined in her seat. I think a few of them will. And the rest? They'll figure it out. Yet, as the truck drove off, what remained in that shop transcended a mere repaired engine. It became a reflection, revealing to each man present an unexpected truth. The following Monday, the atmosphere in the garage felt distinctly altered. The typical morning chatter felt subdued, more deliberate. There were no mentions of football, scores. No playful jabs were exchanged. Something had changed, and the air was thick with it, palpable even to those who couldn't articulate it. Reese was the first to voice the unspoken truth. In the mid-morning light, he leaned over the hood of a 1972 Mustang, casting a glance up at Victor. Saturday keeps swirling in my mind. Victor nodded, his gaze fixed on the carburetor. Same here. She made us all seem a bit rigid, right? No way, Victor replied. She made us appear as if we had ceased to learn. That resonated. It wasn't meant as an insult, merely a statement of fact. lingering in the air between two men accustomed to being the most knowledgeable when it came to machinery. As Rick strolled past with a torque wrench in hand, he caught the last part of the conversation. She didn't belittle us. She revealed the potential within us. Even Trask had remained silent since the event. He entered that morning, refraining from barking orders or hovering over the younger techs, as he typically did. He moved through the space at a more measured pace, pausing occasionally to look at the Ferrari, now fully restored, its cover pulled back just enough to indicate it hadn't been overlooked. Though he would never voice it, he had stayed late, on Sunday night, poring over the diagnostic logs she had produced. The figures were undeniable. The code was precise. The solution was seamless. She wasn't fortunate. She understood her actions. In Bay 2, Reese took a rag and cleaned his hands. I was always taught that this craft relied on repetition. You practice until it becomes second nature. But observing her, she transcended mere repetition. She contemplated. Each action was deliberate. Victor chuckled quietly to himself. It opened my eyes to how complacent I've become with merely acceptable solutions. That was the extent of it. No feelings of shame, just contemplation, a type none of them were accustomed to, in an environment designed more for clamor than truth. Rick rested against the wall nearby. What resonated with me the most? She wasn't aiming to demonstrate anything. She simply wanted to spare her dad from feeling embarrassed. That earned a few nods. Even the youngest tech, Jameer, just fresh from trade school, glanced up from his notes. She's likely younger than I am, and here I am searching online for how to reset a throttle body. Reese let out a light laugh. It's something we all experience. No need to feel down about it, yet she presented it as if it were second nature. Jameer remarked, as though it was an intrinsic part of her being. Perhaps it was indeed. Later that day, Trask summoned Donovan to his office. No intimidation. Without a hint of caution, he made a simple plea for conversation. Donovan entered, meticulously, cleaning his boots before crossing the threshold, as was his custom. He took a seat on his own accord. I admit my mistake, Trask remarked. She avoided his gaze. Donovan remained still. I regretted confronting her in that manner. I shouldn't have taken that challenge with you. She's incredibly sharp, likely sharper than anyone else I've encountered. Who is under 30? Donovan gave a single nod. She is. Trask let out a breath. You nurtured her well. You didn't teach her to repair engines. She learned that on her own. I recognize talent when it presents itself, Trask remarked, and she certainly possesses it. Donovan stood. She possesses more than just skill. She embodies patience. There's a certain intensity that arises not from a desire to gain approval. Trask reclined in his chair. Do you think she'll return here someday? No, Donovan said. But that's not the point, is it? Trask shook his head slowly. No, it isn't. Outside the office, Reese noticed Donovan stepping out. Everything all right? Yeah, Donovan remarked, tilting his cap slightly. An improvement for... Sure. Reese offered a smile. You mentioned that you're cheering for her. Donovan paused. You ought to convey that message personally. That thought lingered in Reese's mind throughout the day. However, as the week drew to a close, an individual at the garage would seize that notion and transform it into something greater. Friday arrived swiftly. By noon, the temperature in Tempe had already soared beyond 95 degrees, and the shop fans were merely circulating the humidity. Yet an unusual energy lingered in the atmosphere, subtle, constant. It was as if the shop had finally exhaled after holding its breath for far too long. At approximately 2 p.m., Reese emerged from the building, cradling a box in his hands. Unassuming, simple, devoid of any extravagance. Inside was a framed photo someone had printed from the garage's security footage. Jalaya, arms deep in the Ferrari's engine bay, wearing that sharp, laser-focused expression. Below it, a plaque read, "The day we learned again." He carried it into the break room and positioned it on the wall, just above the broken coffee machine that had long been neglected. A handful of the guys congregated nearby. Is that from Saturday? Rick inquired. Reese nodded, resolute. We're not letting it slip away. Victor entered the scene next. He gazed at the photo for a prolonged moment. She had no idea we were observing. Her in that way, precisely, Reese remarked. That's what rendered it authentic. At home, Jalaya settled cross-legged on the garage floor, a half-rebuilt motorbike nestled between her knees. The heat was no concern for her. She had grown accustomed to it. She appreciated the sound of tools clinking, the grit beneath her nails, and the way the engine communicated its needs if you paid attention. Donovan emerged with 2 glasses of lemonade. "I thought you might want something refreshing." "Thanks," she said, wiping her brow. He handed her the glass and leaned against the tool chest. "He called you sharp." "Who?" she inquired. "Trask. Claimed you're more perceptive than anyone he's encountered." Jalaya let out a derisive snort. "It doesn't alter his behavior." "No, Donovan." "Concurred, yet it signifies that he's contemplating it." "That's noteworthy." She took a sip of her drink, then placed it down next to a box of spark plugs. "Do you believe they'll keep me in their thoughts?" "I believe they'll recall what you revealed to them." "And what was that revelation?" "That there is still much for them to discover." That response lingered between them, significant and true. A few days later, Reese arrived at their house unexpectedly. He didn't give any notice. He simply pulled up in his worn Silverado, a manila envelope tucked under one arm. Donovan swung the door open. Well, look who we have here. Just came by to leave something behind," Reese remarked. "It won't take long." Jalaya approached the door, her hands still slick with grease from her repairs. "This is for you," Reese said, handing her the envelope. She opened it, revealing a certificate printed on thick paper inside. The Trask Automotive logo softly faded into the background. At the top, the words Honorary Lead Technician stood out. Below, Jalaya Morton was displayed in a sleek black font, for remarkable skill guiding us through challenges and bringing us back to the roots of our passion. Her gaze lingered on the page, taking her time. She remained quiet. He simply glanced up and expressed his gratitude. Reese rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "It's a rarity for individuals to invest so much time seeking something of that nature. I wasn't trying to earn anything," she said. "I know," he replied. "That's why it matters." They lingered for a moment before she spoke. "You didn't have to do this." Reese met her gaze. "We did." Once he departed, Jalaya affixed the certificate to the corkboard in her room, positioned just above her MIT letter and adjacent to her first spark plug rebuild tag from 3 years prior. It wasn't for validation. Rather, it served as a reminder that transformation is achievable, even in environments that never sought it. She chose not to return to Trask Automotive. There was no need for her to intervene. The events that unfolded had already set things in motion. The individuals in that garage, they began to probe deeper, began to pay closer attention, began to reflect before dismissing the next child who appeared unique or held different views, or arrived with her own resources. And Trask, he ceased feigning omniscience. 2 months later, he brought on his first female apprentice. It wasn't for the sake of publicity. Rather, it was because the idea was met with open minds. They were prepared for this change. Jalaya continued her relentless construction. Engines, machines, her future, meticulously crafted piece by piece, wire by wire. When faced with a challenge to prove oneself, there are always 2 paths to take. Take a moment to reflect or unveil the essence of who you truly are. That day, she didn't just demonstrate her worth, she laid bare her true self. If this narrative resonated with you, if it prompted you to reconsider the nature of talent, be sure to subscribe. More tales like this are on the way, perhaps one of them will be yours.